Tonight, a war is brewing over your pay packet, with Aussies being told to forget about any meaningful pay rise to help stop inflation getting out of control. But should it be on workers to take the hit to save the economy? Earlier this week, RBA Governor Philip Lowe took a break from wrecking household budgets to punch a hole in workers' dreams of a long overdue real wage rise.
Just think it's important to remember that the steady state wage increases in Australia should be around 3.5%.
And despite a pre-election push to keep the minimum wage in line with inflation, the government started whistling the Reserve Bank's tune as well.
3.5% that he's referred to is still a significant improvement on where things have been.
At half the projected inflation rate of 7%, that had been a pay cut in real terms for millions of workers.
Ultimately, of course, we want to see employees getting better outcomes and having higher living standards. The risk is that wages and prices just end up chasing each other. That will not lead to higher living standards.
We've been here before. Back in 1983, hair was bigger and shorts were smaller, but economic conditions were similar, and a looming war over wages threatened to derail Australia's fragile economic recovery.
We need a genuine cooperative approach to get growth back into the economy while ensuring that Australian living standards no longer continue to be eroded by inflation.
So the then PM struck an improbable bargain, convincing the unions to swallow a wage freeze.
To cut ordinary family income by 10%. These great goals cannot be achieved overnight or without real equality of sacrifice.
The difference? Unions were far more powerful back then, powerful enough to secure a raft of benefits and entitlements to offset the hip pocket pain. And Bob Hawke was Bob Hawke. Anthony Albanese, it's hard to say just yet.
I think there are a lot of similarities between what we're seeing now and the situation that emerged in the mid-1970s, early 1980s, and I think we've got to have some far-reaching reforms. We've got to be ambitious.
So, can we avoid another wage war?
Can we indeed? We're joined by ACTU boss Sally McManus. And Sally, the Governor of the Reserve Bank is saying that if wage growth is too high, then it's going to take a lot longer to get inflation back under control. That's fair enough, right?
Well, it's a long way off. At the moment, wage growth is 2.4% and inflation is 5.1%. So wage growth isn't even half what inflation is. So, in order for it to get to a point where it's above inflation, I can't really see that happening in the next 12 months. So really, I think the Reserve Bank needs to understand it's actually really hard for workers to get pay rises in our country because we've got a system that actually keeps wages down, and we can see that as evidenced over the last decade nearly.
But Philip Lowe's point was slightly bigger than that, I think, wasn't it? He was basically arguing that in the situation of hyperinflation, we can't afford for wages to keep up with that inflation because we'll then get a recession, we'll get a spiral, and then you get a recession, and then you get high unemployment. Do you accept that analysis at least?
I think that it's, even if you accept the analysis, it's a fantasy that it is happening or that it could happen anytime soon or even likely at all. And the reason why I say that, it's a false equivalent to say today's world is anything like the 1970s. Back then, people were getting pay rises ahead of inflation. Now, there's no way that we're anywhere near that at the moment. And the other just fact is that profits are up 20%, productivity is up 2.8%. The big problem in our country is that workers aren't actually sharing in the wealth. We're at the lowest point in terms of Labor's share of the overall wealth. That's the real story of what's going on.
It does sound like, though, listening to you there, that you would quite like wages to keep up with inflation. And on that point, if I've read that correctly, you'd be opposed to what the Reserve Bank Governor is saying, which suggests that you don't really believe the analysis he's offering.
I think what the Reserve Bank Governor said, and happy to be corrected on this, but I did read very carefully what he said, is that if pay increases end up being 5% every single year into the future, or even in the next couple of years, and inflation isn't at that rate, you're sort of locking in pay rises that are above inflation. It's a bit just fanciful. I feel like I'm debating something that's a reality that's not ever going to exist.
Sally, you talked about bargaining power there. Bob Hawke's grand bargain with the unions required a whole lot of goodwill and sacrifice. Would that be possible today?
So remember, first of all, this grand bargain happened at a time when workers were getting pay rises above inflation. So it'd be like me being in a situation where, you know, average pay rises across the economy were like 7%. They're not, they're 2%. So we would like a grand bargain, and we would like workers to fairly share in the wealth we're producing. So I think that's pretty reasonable, and of course we're always open to talking.
You seem to be saying that the real problem with wages is a lack of bargaining power. Is that another way, really, or kind of admission that you're making, that it's the union movement simply isn't strong enough now?
Well, people that are in unions are going to see pay increases because they do have more bargaining power because they're in unions, but we can't do the heavy lifting for everyone else. And so where you do only have 15% of the workforce in unions, of course, it has a flow-on effect to overall wage increases. Back in the 70s, it was around 50%, so you can see the difference there.
Sally, thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
No worries.